Today's subject matter, released in 1982 for the almighty VECTREX Arcade System, is a little game called Spinball. Now, don't get too excited. There are no blue hedgehogs or bulging mad scientists to be found here, for Spinball is a fairly traditional pinball video game that features one fairly traditional no-frills pinball table for you to play on, and it's a more than capable pinball video game that's fun to play and also quite challenging, particularly due to this being a pinball video game from 1982, and we haven't quite mastered the art of recreating proper pinball physics in video game form, though to be fair, Spinball does a better job of it than I was expecting this to turn out. It's not great, and sometimes it feels like the ball does have a mind of its own, particularly in the top part, but for the most part, the game is largely playable, so just for that alone, Spinball, I feel, deserves a bit of slack. Anyway, Spinball operates as most pinball games would. You launch the ball into the main table and you use your flippers to keep the ball in play, scoring as much points as possible by hitting various targets and preventing it from falling into the pit below. There's the usual pinball bits, specific targets highlighted for specific bonuses, multi-ball, things of that nature you would typically expect from a typical pinball table. You get 5 balls to score as much as possible. There are no game variations of any kind to be found here, but you do have 2-player alternating play, so that's a possible option for those who want it. Controls are fairly unique, but otherwise fairly functional. Pulling down on the stick pulls back the plunger, and pressing button 4 launches the ball into the field, from which you could control the flippers with buttons 2 and 3, while the stick is used to nudge the machine. Of course, nudging the machine one time too many will eventually result in a tilt penalty and total loss of control over the ball, which falls into the pit and you lose a ball, of course. Nothing out of the ordinary, and Spinball does control fairly well. The ball physics are fairly solid, though sometimes it'll glitch out and behave in a manner one wouldn't expect, but for the most part this is a fairly straightforward, no-frills pinball game, and quite a competent one at that. One thing worth mentioning is Spinball possessing a pause feature. By pressing button 1, you could pause the action, something that wasn't all that common back in the day, but some games and eventually machines could pull it off. Spinball features a fully round ball, which is quite novel by VECTREX standards. The table itself resembles a typical pinball layout, nothing too fancy, and some of the elements seem a bit simplistic, but you can make out all the doohickeys and gimmickry of a pinball table on screen. The one downside is your score not displaying while the game is in play. It'll pop up during the points tallying bits between balls played, but other than that, the game as a whole looks fine. The same, sadly, cannot be said for the sound effects. They sound like typical VECTREX arcade sound effects, and they don't quite fit the whole pinball thing, and the jingles are kinda meh as well. Really not much else to say there. Overall, Spinball is pinball done well on the VECTREX, and that's its only real selling point. Pinball has been a genre of sorts that's been virtually done on every piece of video game hardware, and there's plenty of standouts out there, and when compared to that lot, Spinball does get lost in the shuffle. But hey, if you want a decent pinball game on the VECTREX, Spinball fulfills that need, it gets the job done, and that's all it needed to be. This one's fine. Nothing to write home about, it's just fine.